Welcome, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. We are driving home. Today is one of those days, really, this week is one of those weeks where the schedule is very tight. And that makes me a little neurotic, drives me a little crazy, but I'm doing my best to keep up with expectations. That being said, just as a heads up, there will be no live stream on Friday. I am going skiing with my son, so I will be otherwise occupied. Um, so, diving into today's topics. I wanted to, it's going to be a bit more of a grab bag. Part of that is because I'm pretty tired midweek. I've been burning the candle at both ends. Unfortunately, one of those nights last night where I went to go check on my youngest as I was going to bed and discovered that she had thrown up in the bed. So we had to have an adventure and get her and the bed all cleaned up and get everything squared away and get her settled and calm. So I got very little sleep last night. But we're just going to make the best of it. So hopefully I'm somewhat coherent. Either way, should be interesting. I wanted to start today on a more positive topic. It's pretty easy to fixate on negative topics, and it's actually fairly profitable to mock and to be cynical and to chase after the negative. I mean, it's the age-old sentiment, if it bleeds, it leads. It's very easy to operate that way. I'm going to try and go against the grain a little bit on this channel. I'm going to be a realist. There's going to be some nasty stuff we're going to have to talk about. But I don't see any reason why we have to be preoccupied with negativity. So I want to start and talk a little bit today about mentorship. I am an engineer by training, if not by education. I actually got a psychology degree of all things, but I've been working in computers for most of my life. And so a lot of my titles have words like technician, engineer, etc. Just kind of mix and match depending on how the company wants to present your role. So if you ask me to build a bridge, I can't help you with that. If you ask me to install a complex computer system, that I can do. But one of the interesting things about tech is that there is always a strong educational component because tech is always changing. Both the methodology of how business and civilization, regular people, implement the available technology, but also the tech itself. And then you layer onto that the way different competitors present their technology, their spin on things, the way the market spends money shifts over time. If you want to stay in tech long term, you have to basically constantly be growing and evolving and learning. If you don't, well, then you're going to get left behind. You might get siloed in a particular specialty, which could be really good, but it makes it so that maybe it's hard for you to leave your present job. Maybe some of your skills don't translate. Um, this has been on my mind for the last while, ever since people started talking about the meme of learn to code. You know, if your job disappears, it's no problem. You can just retrain and learn a new job. You can just learn to code without really looking at historically whether or not that's realistic. Most of the time, it's not. Uh, Believe it or not, programming is hard, and so is truck driving. And the skills for those two things don't necessarily overlap. So we're going to have some societal dislocation, whether or not you're in tech, just because these innovations and these disruptions, they create new opportunity, but they also mess around. They mess with the job market, and they make it difficult to have that kind of stable growth, that kind of steady career that a lot of people are searching for. It's not very comfortable to be in a field that's constantly evolving. It's a little scary, and it's a lot of work. But I took a personality test a long time ago, and one of the things that I'm wired for is challenge. And so if I'm not being challenged, I get bored. And when I get bored, I misbehave. And generally, I get grumpy, and I make the people around me grumpy. And that's one of the reasons I started this channel, is because I looked at my life and I saw, hey, I'm pretty busy. You know what? Let's do something more. Let's do something we've never done before. Let's learn a new skill. So here we are. And that kind of circles me back to what I want to talk about today, which is mentorships. And by extension, apprenticeships. More broadly speaking, apprenticeships. Because from the masculine perspective, from the masculine mind, although I think it's parts of this are pretty universal in the human race. I've never been a woman, so some things I can't speak to. But in particular, in male societal roles, there is often a built-in, there's two key elements to successful male societal roles. Coming of age ceremonies, things where you are acknowledged within the community that you have been accepted into a different role or a different tier of value. And hand in hand with that, apprenticeships, mentorships. And for many, many, many generations, you would end up with a situation where the most common apprenticeship was father to son. So if the dad is a blacksmith, the son is going to learn blacksmithing as he grows up. Now, if the father's a shopkeeper, well, then the son's going to learn accounting and inventory and bartering and negotiation, customer relations, and all the things that go into keeping a store. Every once in a while, you might see a situation where someone gets apprenticed off far away or to a particular opportunity that arises. And in the modern world, as there's been more and more connectivity and more transportation options, you've seen more and more a very fluid society where people are atomistic. People tend to move themselves or sometimes their family unit and just move cross-laterally to a different area, to a different culture, to a different part of the world, or to a different part of the country they live in. Maybe going along with the job change, career change, whatever. Maybe pursuing a certain educational opportunity. I just did this. My family and I moved from Arizona to Colorado. We were doing a job change. We were doing a career shift. We were mixing things up. And in many ways, we kind of had to start over. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, because I've been in a position where since moving here, my job life has been busy but unstable. The job that I'm in right now is a contract position that's wrapping itself up. And in this contract position, I'm doing kind of a grab bag, kind of a miscellaneous role. It's one of those things where I was hired to backfill a position for someone who was out on leave due to a medical issue. And so my skills don't match up with the role. I'm a little more senior than this role, but it beat what I was doing at the time, and it was short term, and I figured, hey, why not? It could be interesting, and the money is good enough to be worth it, to be worth the fuss. So I come in here, and I'm doing the work. I'm able to do the job from day one. It's not that big of a deal. But I discovered that several of the people who were on the team were relatively new. Now, I'm the new guy. I'm the brand new guy, and I'm the temporary guy. So I didn't want to horn in or try and, I didn't want to be a jerk about it. But over time, I've been getting more and more opportunities, not just to do projects for the job, but to train on projects for the job. And it's been very good. I'm very comfortable in this role of this kind of teaching and modeling role. Again, I've been a dad for a while. I've trained a bunch in the different jobs that I've had, and I have been trained extensively. There's a certain knowledge transfer that goes along with these kind of professional skills, particularly in a male-dominated field like engineering, technology. Not to say that there aren't many, many wonderful female engineers, but predominantly the work environments that I've been in have been mostly male. it is what it is. Human nature is just kind of a stubborn thing. So, um, I've had the opportunity to be mentored, and I've had the opportunity to mentor other people, and I've kind of resumed that role. And today I was working with a newer engineer, and we were doing a particular skill. And the funny thing is, technology is fantastic. It's wonderful. But at a certain nuts and bolts level, it's still ones and zeros. It's still wires and spinning disks. It's still plastic cases and power supplies. And that's kind of where my specialty lives. Is It's called the physical layer, but it's at that part of technology that interacts with the real world. Um, Excuse me. Like I said, it has been a week. So we were installing sensor cables for securing server cabinets. So the server cabinets have sensors to detect when they're open and closed. And then the authorization system can check and say, is this supposed to be open right now? And if it's not, it throws an alarm, and away we go, drama. So we were installing sensor cables, which are thin copper cables. They come in a plastic sheath. And the way that it works is you cut it to length and then you terminate it. And the funny thing was, I went ahead and I did the first one. And then I asked this newer engineer to do the second one. And he just right away just struggled with it. And it's a quick thing to take we're talking about taking the plastic sheathing off, but leaving the metal inside intact. And it doesn't take long if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing, it can be very frustrating and even a little embarrassing, especially when the guy next to you just did it. And we were talking through it, and I said, I showed him a few times, and he was just having trouble getting the hang of it. And I said, first off, don't feel bad about this. And I asked him how old he was. He's in his 20s. And I did the math, and I realized I'm that guy. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I should be good at it by now. If not, that's kind of embarrassing. So we went ahead and we finished the job, but I handed him some scrap cable, and I said, hey, next time you're just sitting around, because there's some downtime in what we do, as there usually is. Next time you're just sitting around, go ahead and practice. Give it a try. Just start to learn and engage with it. And he appreciated that, and he grabbed it up, and we moved on with our day. But I've been reflecting on that conversation a little bit as I was preparing for today's live stream, because it's evocative of a few things that I hold as core principles. And one of the purposes of this channel is to espouse these core principles and to get more skilled at presenting them clearly and to get more skilled at presenting them persuasively. Because I think there's a real value to the way I've learned to interact with the world, and I'd like to share that value, and hopefully you agree. So, some of the principles that we can expound on as it relates to this particular situation. The first is, everybody can learn something from somebody else. Everyone that you interact with, there's something you can learn from them. That's a challenging statement. I learned it from Dale Carnegie. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Fantastic book. Um, Everyone is superior than you, better than you are in at least one thing. So if you really want to learn, if you really want to expand your skills, if you want to grow as a human being, as you interact with people, really look, really think, really ask, and dig in and try and find out with the people that you're interacting with, what are the things they're passionate about? What are the things that they spend time and money on freely because it's something that they love? And the human race is so broad and so varied that there is an endless array of skills and abilities that people will gladly teach you, gladly talk to you about, because this is what they love. This is what gets them out of bed in the morning. So that's one thing. It's a fascinating way to go through life, to talk to people and try and understand the things that they are passionate about and skilled. And it's a very effective way to learn because you'll never meet a better teacher. Secondly, the principle that most education is one-to-one. Most real fundamental education is one-to-one. And I want to parse this a little bit, so bear with me while we work through some terminology. I'm going to split apart the idea of explanation and knowledge transfer. Sorry, education and knowledge transfer. So if the new HR policy at your work is that if your last name is A through L, your lunch break is noon to 12:30, and if your last name is M through Z, your lunch break is 12:30 to 1. You need to know that. Someone needs to transfer that knowledge to you. But it doesn't take any real education. It doesn't take any real skill training. You need to absorb that information and work with it. So there's a certain tier of information that we interact with in the world around us. That's just that knowledge transfer level. Hey, hon, I'm going to go to the bank. How much money do we need for groceries this week? Well, we look at our budget. We say, we need $300 for groceries. Great. I'm going to go pull out that cash. We'll put it in an envelope. We'll use that for our grocery money. That's one way of handling groceries. And it's important to learn how to manage your money. Maybe we'll circle back to that. But at the end of the day, when you're having kind of one of those practical, tactical conversations, we need to get from A to B. It's just a discussion. It's just at a certain kind of knowledge transfer level. Now, we can take a step up from there and we can talk about skills training. And that's kind of what we were dealing with today at work, where I was working with the newer engineer. We all understood what we were doing, and he's a good engineer. He's good at what he does. He's a good technician. He does the job well, but there are skills that he just hasn't practiced and honed and refined enough to have them be automatic yet. And so there's still some stuff that he can learn and improve his ability as he's engaging with those skills. So it might take some correction. It might take some back and forth. It might take some trial and error. But eventually, his skills should improve. And his skills should improve at some point to the point where he can, in turn, teach someone else. That's really the goal of all education, is to gain enough competency that you can then pass that on, and the education you pass on is effective. It's not corrupted or diluted by your own inattention or inexperience or inartful expression, but you can successfully pass on to the next person. So as an example, I have a whole bunch of nieces and nephews because most of my siblings got married before I did, had kids before I did. And so most of my interaction with little people was as an uncle for a long time. And as an uncle, I'm there to play with them, and it's cute, and they'll tell stories, and we'll do jokes, and we'll play games, and whatever. Most of the time, frankly, I'm not babysitting, I'm there visiting. And so if a baby needs a diaper change, it's not my kid. I'm not going to change the diaper. And so most of the time, and when I was a kid, none of my younger siblings, the youngest one is only a couple of years younger than me. So I didn't have a lot of experience from growing up with changing diapers. And so the first time in my life I changed a diaper, I was an adult. And it's not rocket science. You're cleaning human skin, making them comfortable, put a clean diaper on them, strap them up, move on. I put the diaper on backwards. I didn't realize it at the time, I got it on. It was a little fussy, but I was like, well, I've never done this before. My brother, when he took it off later that day, he laughed at me. He's like, well, good job, except you did it backwards. And so in certain ways, I failed at that particular task. But I learned, and now I have lots of experience changing diapers. Thankfully, we're out of that phase. Hallelujah. But before we got out of that phase completely, my oldest was old enough to learn how. And so I started teaching him how to change a diaper. It's just a skill. It's not fundamental to life, but it's important. It's a good skill to have. And maybe when he's confronted with the need to change a diaper as an adult, he won't put it on backwards. We'll see. So we have knowledge transfer, we have skills training, and then just for a big bucket at the top, probably we could break this down with a little more thought, but I am driving. There's a limit to how much I can articulate when I'm driving. We'll call it transformational education. And I'll give you an example. My wife and I are coming up on 17 years of marriage. And I laugh because we were two broke college students when we got married. And we got married, we did not know what we were doing. We came from good families. We came from relatively smart families, relatively wise with money. Maybe we were in love. Maybe we're just clueless idiots. I don't know. Either way, we basically took the first year of our marriage and made just about every single money mistake you could make. At one point, my mortgage payment was 54% of my take-home pay. Our mortgage payment was 54% of our take-home pay. And that's not a happy place to be. That's a very stressful place to be. That's a place that if you stay in that place for very long, you're not going to be married any longer. And so we had some money fights. We had some stress. We had some pain. It was not a good place to be. And luckily, this is only one of the pieces that turned things around, but luckily I found Dave Ramsey. And Dave Ramsey presented some very useful information at a time where I needed to change fundamentally. I needed to transform not just a few skills, not just absorb a little knowledge, but I needed to actually transform the way I looked at the world and the way I dealt with the world on a fundamental level. Change who I was on the inside. Because I had to realize that a big part why we were screwed up was some of the emotional entanglements around money that I brought into the marriage. Now, I'm not going to throw myself completely under the bus. We both had issues. Usually it takes two people working together to make as big of a mess as we did. But we sat down, we got on the same page, we agreed to move in the same direction, we transformed our lives together, and we spent the next 8 years cleaning up our mess. It took us 1 year to make the mess. It took us pretty close to 8 years to clean it up before we were finally debt-free, except for a much more reasonable mortgage. And our life was dramatically improved by that experience. So, knowledge transfer, skills training, transformation. You need all three types of education. But I believe, to the core of who I am, that it is really, really hard to execute transformational change, transformational education with another person. Even if both parties are fully on board with this plan. And it is completely impossible if one party refuses to engage at that level, to say, all right, I am willing to dig deep, to rip my life apart, figure out what's going wrong, and put it right. That is a big ask. And when it comes to society, at a certain fundamental level, you have to have channels for that kind of change. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with a dysfunctional, fractured society with dysfunctional, fractured human beings who can't form cohesive units, who can't build successful long-term relationships, who can't function at a high level so that when a crisis happens, they can rise to the level of that crisis and overcome it and improve as a whole, as a society. If you fail to heal and transform the individual, you doom the collective to failure. I think that one of the best ways to accomplish that kind of transformational change is through a strong one-to-one bonded relationship. Father to son, master to apprentice, even peer-to-peer in certain circumstances. But you can't do it with an email from HR. You can't do it with a government program. You can't do it by throwing money at it. In fact, usually throwing money at this kind of problem makes the problem worse, not better. Now I look at our society and I see that we have largely eliminated vocational training. Now, it's still there if you want to go chase it down, but it is no longer as supported and lauded in our society. During, I think it was 08 and 09, when there was a great big recession and everyone was freaking out, Mike Rowe is a great guy on this sort of stuff. He's the guy that did Dirty Jobs for all those years. He's a wonderfully pragmatic guy, and he's very charming. And I heard him on a radio program, and he was saying, "Listen, we are we're dealing with this huge unemployment problem from all this dislocation, from all the housing crisis situation." He said, "But what you have to understand is that in certain segments of the economy, we are desperate for qualified candidates. We are begging and paying top dollar wages, and we can't get people in the front door. And if you want to break it down broadly, basically the economy had way too many people with master's degrees and not enough electricians and heavy equipment operators and truckers, jobs that used to be societally supported better than they are now. There's this weird bent in our culture where everybody needs to go to college. And shoot, now that everyone's gone to college, pretty much if you're going to go anywhere, you need a master's degree, et cetera, et cetera. It's a credential arms race that we've engaged in. But some jobs don't take a master's degree. Some jobs don't take a bachelor's degree. And society needs people who are willing to do those jobs and do them well with a sense of mastery and commitment and engagement. We need that. And we are losing it because we don't support it and encourage it. Instead, there's huge, loud, somewhat obnoxious programs that direct everyone that can be pushed that direction into higher education and the student loans that go with it, which that's a whole other animal. So that's my live stream for today. The idea that everyone needs transformational change, transformational education from time to time. That is hard in the best of circumstances. That it requires both parties to be committed to that education. And it helps if you have a pre-existing high trust relationship between those two people. it makes it more likely to succeed. It's still dang hard, but it makes it more likely. Tonight, I've got a date night with the wife, so I don't have time to stop and check comments, which we'll see. I'll be all a Twitter, no pun intended, when I get my first engagement on a live stream. I've been doing this a couple weeks. I'm not worried about it. It's going to take time. Um, but one small moment of celebration. I now have received 100 likes on my Rumble channel, and I have received 52 views on my YouTube channel. Those are very, very tiny numbers, but they're not zero. One of these days, I'll break down on a live stream and we'll talk about the snowball effect. Snowball is arguably Archimedes' lever. It is the lever sufficiently long to move the world. And every single snowball starts with a single snowflake, if you think about it. So I am encouraged to see even a modicum of engagement, and we're just going to keep on jamming and see where it takes us. Thank you very much for your time. Have a lovely day.